It's a huge pleasure to join today and to discuss the findings of the study that was initiated by EFGCP. And it was part of a consortium together with advocates, patient representatives, EURTC, KU Leuven, and it was supported by FPA. I will briefly go through the study itself and focus specifically on the recommendations that we made as a consortium based on the empirical results that we got. So the main purpose of our study that we conducted was to analyze the current situation of cross-border access to clinical trials in the European Union. And we wanted to provide a first idea of an overview of stakeholders' real-life experience and to identify the needs, challenges, and the potential for facilitation of such cross-border access. The methodology that we employed was mixed methods. We relied on literature review of existing scholarship debates, a survey, an online survey, and semi-structured interviews. I will briefly go through the results. In terms of the literature review, what was one very important, the most important finding was that we do not currently have a specific European Union level legislation that facilitates or regulates cross-border access to clinical trials. We looked into the so-called cross-border healthcare directive that provides for the possibility to receive treatments in a foreign country and be reimbursed for it. However, clinical trials are not in the scope of the directive. But this piece of law established important mechanisms and tools that could be of use for cross-border access to clinical trials, such as the European Reference Networks system. In terms of our empirical study results, we had quite a success and interest in terms of participation. When it comes to the online survey, we received almost 400 responses across the European Union. When it comes to the interviews, that were 38 experts. And the majority of interest came, as you can see, from investigators, 46% in the survey, 29% in the interviews, and patient representatives, patient organizations, and individual patient and carers, again, both in the survey and in the interviews. In terms of country representation, the most interest into the study was shown by Western, Southern, and Northern Europe. It was much harder, much more challenging to reach Eastern Europe. The main topics explored, that was the experience with cross-border access to clinical trials, whether it is occurring, how it is occurring currently, the frequency increase or decrease in cross-border access to clinical trials, the motivations to join trials abroad, as well as the countries from which people want to travel or to which people want to travel to participate, the main challenges, who should be responsible for logistics and cost coverage, the limitations, and finally, how to facilitate cross-border access. I'm going to give you the highlights of some of the main topics that we explored and some of the main conclusions that we came to. First of all, in terms of experience, we asked investigators what has been the highest percentage of foreign patients that they have had in any of their clinical trials. And as you can see, almost half of the participants responded that less than 1% of patients come from abroad. This should be contrasted with the interviews that confirmed that the number of foreign patients is less than 1%, close to 0. But also there is this strong idea that, and I'm citing here a patient representative, that once somebody realizes that there is a freedom of movement, there would be very little that can keep them back, because people will move, especially when their life and their health depends on this. In terms of the main reasons to seek participation in a clinical trial abroad, it was identified to be access to treatments. And according to the interviews, access to treatments can be understood in 4 different ways. First of all, in the field of rare diseases, when there is no treatment, no treatment has existed before, and actually the trial is the first one to offer such a possibility. Second, when all available lines of therapy have been exhausted within the healthcare system. Third, when the treatment is not reimbursed by the healthcare system in the patient's home country. And finally, when the clinical trial uses a specific technology that is not yet available in the patient's home country. The main challenges that we identified here, they're ordered in terms of the preference, in terms of what is the most challenging for patients seeking treatment abroad, seeking clinical trial abroad. First of all, that was cost coverage, who would be responsible for organizing the trip abroad, accommodation, insurance. Second, language barrier, lack of information, procedural challenges, travel distance, the vulnerability of the patient leaving their family, their work, their country, and finally, managing cultural barriers in the foreign country. I would like to focus on lack of information, which I think is very pertinent in terms of the scope of our webinar, our workshop today. And our participants discussed the lack of information in view of three key aspects. First of all, there is a lack of enough information about ongoing trials, meaning the eligibility criteria, the open sites abroad, and also there is lack of an appropriate system for patient referral. Second of all, at the second level, there is also need for more information about the value of clinical research in general, to really, for people to understand why is it important to participate, what are the benefits, why is it so valuable. And finally, there is a huge gap of information when it comes to best practices, how to join a clinical trial abroad, how to navigate the foreign healthcare systems, the legislation, the regulations, insurance, and so on. In the scope of our study, we also identified existing initiatives that help mitigate the challenges that we identified. I'm listing the several most key ones that we discussed. First of all, the Nordic Network for Early Cancer Trials that is managed, that exists in Denmark, Finland, Sweden, and Norway. And the idea is to refer patients for phase 1 early phase clinical trials between the different countries and establish a system of cooperation to find the most appropriate trial abroad and treatment abroad. Second of all, there exists bilateral agreements for collaboration between university hospitals, for instance, between Germany and the Netherlands, that again would make possible the possibility to join a trial abroad. Similarly, there are also multidisciplinary national tumor boards or expert panels, notably in Denmark and Norway, that again work as referral centers that help identify the most suitable trial abroad. And also helpful in this regard is the example of a joint Nordic electronic information portal on ethics committee approvals to streamline an otherwise very unharmonized process. And this is currently in progress. The main question that we investigated with our study was, do we need cross-border access? And you can see on the graph here on the pie chart that 92% of our participants said yes, absolutely we need that. There is a strong need to improve the system. However, it was also discussed that we also need to keep the broader view in mind. Cross-border access is, of course, only a part of the solution. There is also a need to bring clinical trials closer to the patient, which is related to the need for simplification of the EU clinical trials framework, the very complex legislative framework that exists. In terms of the proposals for future actions that we discussed in the survey and in the interviews, you will see on the slides that the most prevalent one was the need to offer reliable and easily accessible information. And same in the interviews where we discussed both tools directly addressing cross-border access and indirectly addressing cross-border access. On the one side, there is the conclusion, the big value of creating multi-stakeholder guidelines, a practical roadmap for navigating the different systems, but also optimizing how information is currently disseminated And this is where a trial matching tool would be very valuable, very much needed. So in terms of conclusions, what we know and what would be the next steps would be the need for multi-stakeholder, multinational discussions to create practical guidelines for navigating the system. And I would also like to cite here the manuscript, the article that came as part of the effort to conduct this study, which is open access, and you can find on the QR codes on my slides, and also there is a link to Frontiers in Medicine. And I would also like to thank the whole research team. You can see the names of all involved here for the great collaboration and for coming together to these valuable conclusions. With this, I thank you very much, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Teodora. That was really very much to the point. I think the situation of cross-border access to trials accentuates the problem that we are facing or that we are going to face when trial matching solution initiated by the patients will become more the norm, which means that the workload for the investigators to accommodate these different patient conditions, so to say, into their clinical trial will certainly increase to some degree the complexity for the investigator. But on the other hand, it can really help to facilitate the increase of patients enrolled into clinical trials. Interesting here was that the majority of patients who were looking for a trial abroad were in Western European countries. So although the interest in Eastern European countries of those who participated in the survey and in the interviews was great, the awareness and, let's say, perhaps the readiness to think about this solution was clearly less in Central and Eastern European countries. So when we talk about fair access to treatment or fair access to trials, there is clearly an area of particular need for improvement in this part of Europe. Thank you very much, Teodora. Let's go straight to the poll. Should national healthcare systems enable or support trial participation in another country? So is that a request for the national healthcare systems to facilitate that? Couple of more answers, perhaps. Okay, but I think the trend is clear. Yes, there should really be an attention of the healthcare systems to facilitate that. Next question. Should cross-border access to clinical trials be regulated by European legislation to facilitate joining a found trial abroad? So one answer is yes, I think the EU should take responsibility for enabling trial finding and enrollment across borders. Or no, I don't think that this requires EU legislation. Practicalities should be enabled between the stakeholders, like the networks, etc., the solutions, the best practices that Teodora presented. Or no, I don't think that this requires EU legislation. Practicalities should be enabled between the stakeholders involved. So the sponsor, investigator, patient should figure that out amongst themselves. Or the last one, there was one other solution, Brian, is that not? No, here is the last one. No, it's solely the patient's decision in which site he or she wants to participate in a matching trial. And so also to make the decision that, for example, another country would not be one of the options. So what is your opinion? when we say the EU should take responsibility, that means there is the possibility of a legislation, as we have seen before, but also, for example, supporting the infrastructure for something like that with public money, with EU money. I mean, it has started to some degree because there is this PharmaLedger project where this is one of the use cases. So public funding is here a possible option. On the other hand, also in this research that Teodora presented, there was a lot about the discussion about who should pay for patients moving abroad on a longer distance. Should that be the sponsor? Should that be in the sponsor study budget? Or should it be the investigator who should care for that? Or should it be on the patient side? Or all together, and then the last one is the patient's decision. So we have here, can you show the first one? Is that, so the first one is, yes, EU should take responsibility with 50%, about a third said it should be the three stakeholders, sponsor, investigator, patient, who should figure that out amongst themselves. And 20% said it's really just the decision of the patient whether he wants to go abroad or not. And so he can also rule that out and not create that issue. Okay, thank you very much.